Welcome, Max. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
What pronouns do you accept or use?
I primarily use he, him, his pronouns, and I also accept the they, them, their pronouns. It depends on the space that I'm in, or really sometimes even on the day. But both are acceptable, and I utilize both interchangeably.
Okay. How long have you used those pronouns, and when and where might you prefer one or the other?
I've been utilizing they, them pronouns for much longer. When I was in grad school, I was in a space where I was identifying as gender non-binary, and this was in like 2014. And then as I was coming to terms with my trans masculine identity, I felt that he, him pronouns were more aligned with my expression and my identity. But I really like to keep they, them pronouns because it's a way for me to really um, break societal norms. Now that I'm in a space where I'm identifying more as trans masculine, and many folks from the outside might deem me as cisgender, it's an opportunity for me to say that you don't have to be gender nonconforming or in an androgynous space to have to utilize pronouns outside of he, him, or she, her. So it's really kind of like a FU to society, too.
Would there ever be a time that you would be upset if someone asked what pronouns you use?
Absolutely not. Um, Learning opportunities come through asking or mirroring um, pronouns. And so, in fact, I'm elated most times when folks ask me my pronouns. By you asking for my pronouns, or for me to provide pronouns in my email signature or my business cards or whatever it might be, I'm opening that opportunity to let you know how I want to be addressed. And so, yeah, asking for pronouns is always 100% acceptable.
Can you elaborate on your journey coming to use the pronouns that you use?
For me, transitioning and identifying within the trans spectrum has been ongoing for like really like the last 5 years. I started utilizing they them pronouns and started really thinking about my gender identity and expression in late college and in grad school. And so when I came to grad school in 2012, I was still going by my birth name or my dead name, given name, whatever you want to call it. And that didn't feel right to me. And so I decided that I didn't want to go by that name anymore, but I didn't know what name I wanted to go by. So I decided to just utilize the initial of my name, which is M. And that was an interesting time in my life because I hadn't medically transitioned yet, and so hormones weren't in my life, and a lot of folks would think that M was short for Emily, and I was like, oh my gosh, no, like that's definitely not right. Decided that I wanted to pursue Maxwell as my name because it had a similar sound, similar syllables, and I wanted to keep the initial as my dead name, and so Maxwell was it. And then Lee is my middle name that I chose. That also has kind of a similar tone where my given middle name had Lee in it. And at one time, my parents told me, had I been assigned male at birth, Lee would have been my given middle name. So it just makes sense to go with Maxwell Lee.
How much responsibility do you think should be put on others to ask your pronouns, or for you and other non binary individuals to tell others?
Um, so, I mean, I would like for our culture to just, get to a space where whenever we introduce ourselves, our pronouns are always followed by our names. I try to take on that role, and that might be me as an individual. It might be because I'm an educator or an activist, and so I really want to set an example and be able to mirror what I hope to receive in return. And so when I introduce myself in meetings, in one-on-one encounters, I'll always say, "Hi, my name's Max. I use he, him pronouns. And sometimes I can gauge the conversation, like if an individual's like, what does that mean? I don't know what to do. I might then follow that with a question to them, say, what pronouns do you use, or how can I refer to you as? And then that provides that opportunity to educate folks on pronouns, or maybe they don't know what pronouns they use because they've never been asked that question. So I guess more often than not, I generally lead that, but when folks provide that for me first, even if it's like on an application or on a form or something like that, when folks ask for pronouns, that's a good feeling.
How do you feel race plays into gender identity and acceptance of someone's gender?
An overarching answer is that all marginalized communities are interconnected, because essentially, like, like liberation isn't fully achieved until like all communities have ended oppression, right? To talk to my experience, something that I frequently talk about is how I've experienced like the intersections of like my white privilege, and then also now my privilege of identifying or passing as male. So up until like 23, 24 years of my life, I lived as, or I was perceived as, a white woman. And so up until that point, I haven't really had to think. And I mean, my privileged identities primarily have been my racial identities. And so within these past years, I really have to be cognizant of the space that I take up now that I identify as, I'm perceived as a white man.
You've said that you've legally changed your name, legally changed your sex. Um, and off camera, you did touch a little bit on your relationship. Can you tell me more of how your gender and everything else plays into the relationship that you have?
My partner identifies as cisgender. And so I guess to the outside perspective, somebody might deem us as being in a straight relationship. But we both identify as queer, so our sexual identity is queer. And that means two different things for both of us. But I think for the same reason that we both hang on to that queer identity is the reason that I utilize they, them pronouns. Is while I could be seen as male, or while I could be seen as being in a straight relationship, it's a way for me to really break the binary and really try to move outside the box and societal expectations of how I should present and how I should identify and what my relationship should look like. So it's an opportunity for me to, like I like to utilize the example of, folks who might identify as heterosexual or are in a heterosexual relationship. It's perfectly acceptable and encouraged to utilize partner rather than wife or husband. Not to say that there's anything wrong with any of it, but I think it opens doors and provides space for folks who may not call their significant others husband or wife, and it's more inclusive.
If you had to list 10 things in your life that you think about the most or that might be the most important to you, where would your gender identity fit in?
It's hard to pinpoint because my gender identity, as well as many of the other identities I possess, affect all aspects of my life. And so, like while I would say like my relationship and my job and my education and my civic engagement, whatever things in my life are most important to me like that, I feel that how I show up to those spaces, how I commit to those opportunities, what roles I possess, my gender identity affects all of that, whether it's outwardly or not. So the way that I define my relationship, my gender identity plays a huge role. The type of civic engagement I'm involved in, my gender identity plays a huge role. And I think, once again, kind of going back to this educator activist these labels that I hold, I think that I also utilize my gender identity as an opportunity to engage and to invite folks to the conversation.
What message or advice might you have for youth or for parents who have youth who are questioning their gender identity?
We know from research that children are very capable of articulating their gender identity and their experiences at a very young age. And so I would say listen to your child. Um, don't try to be the driver of their outcome. Like, let them be the driver and take you to coming to terms and coming to understand better about their gender identity and their feelings and their desires, because they know themselves best, whether parents know it or not. No matter like where you stand or where you feel or what you feel is best for your child, they know best, and so you just have to love them unconditionally through that process.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
For folks that are watching this, really challenge yourself to think about how you interact with folks on a daily basis. Whether you know it or not, like, trans people are out there and we exist, and folks that don't identify within the binary exist, and they may not tell you. And so really try to provide that opportunity to open that door, and not assume. So providing your pronouns, not assuming somebody's pronouns, and then just letting yourself be vulnerable in that process.